Okay, so we'll call the meeting to order. We have to take attendance, right? So Hadassah Mataveski. Are you present? Hadassah?
Present.
Okay, Ashley Seyfried. Did I say
Present.
that right?
Seyfried, yep.
Huh?
Seyfried.
Seyfried, okay.
Yeah.
Jill Schultz. And I don't see Julian. Julian Shepherd, no, he might come in.
Okay.
And Thomas Costello present.
Richard is also.
Huh?
Richard.
Richard? Yes, but he's not on the committee, so I don't know if you note that differently,
No, I'm a guest.
right? You're a guest.
Guest, yeah.
Okay. Do we need to do public comment at this? Okay. So there's no public comment. Basically, this is an organizational meeting. So there's not really, we have an agenda. But where did I put the agenda, by the way?
I just emailed it to everybody.
Okay, do you have access to email? You can get it in your email. But Hadassah, because I didn't know you're here, if as I talk, I'm going to try to find those two emails that I sent out. So that you can see them. Richard, would you like a copy? Can they hear me?
What email is that?
This is just just my personal notes about some thoughts that I had that we could talk about today.
Okay, sure.
This is the Native Gardens Taskforce, and generally we're gonna address the idea of introducing native species into municipal property on vacant lots, very broadly speaking, for the purpose of improving the environment and other things that are we can talk about. And Jill, since you're on limited time, could you take a minute to just talk about for the record what native species gardens are, or however, I'm not sure about the wording on that, but just to kind of give an overview really briefly.
Jill, you're muted.
Sorry about that.
Perfect.
I would say the important things to keep in mind is I always promote a good, better, best approach to anything environmental. And I would say that I would call good the beginning of adding any native plants to what's going on with the removal of invasive species. Better is aiming for 50% native plants, and best is trying to get to 70 to 80%, which is where most people are saying you're achieving a sustainable habitat at that point. Getting good diversity of plants, trying to get all the layers, trying to mimic nature as much as we can. If the interest is, in trying to mitigate floods, dense planting is going to be very important for that. And then in terms of how do we define native, we'd say we should be doing that by ecoregion, not by zone, which a lot of vegetable gardeners are used to, or by any political boundaries. So, our ecoregion actually extends down into Pennsylvania. The plants that are local to us are just as local to them. In terms of sourcing plants, if the more local we can get, the better. But again, I take that good, better, best approach, and I try to stay within about 200 miles of Binghamton when I'm buying personally. I also always try to go for the straight species. That means the way the plant is in the wild, not modified by people. that is more important with wildflowers than with trees and shrubs, which have unbelievable genetic diversity within their range. And I would guess I would say, you know, we experiment. I personally always plant the smallest plants I can get. So I try to get what's called plugs or bare root. They're the most affordable. And you have the best ratio of the growing part of the plant to the roots. So the best chance that they'll survive. And other than that, I have a lot of resources that I'm happy to share with anyone if they're curious. And as we're doing this, I say if we also promote the idea of happiness, because there's right now a lot of scientific evidence to show that when people have time in nature, it improves their mental health. So I think at the same time we can achieve a lot of goals at the same time, but making part of it beauty and joy will help convince people to do more of it. And I'd love us to be, at the same time we're doing stuff municipally, I would love to be promoting to people that you can do this, whether you're renting and putting out a single pot or you have a house, everyone can help make this better.
Okay, I appreciate that. Maybe I should have asked you, but I didn't. We should all introduce ourselves since this is being publicly broadcast and recorded. So could you just say in 2 sentences or whatever, who you are and why you're on this, committee?
Sure, I'm Jill Schultz. I'm a Binghamton resident, and I'm here because I've become a passionate rewilder, and I belong to several different groups working on that. None of which have local chapters, but close by.
Okay, great. Ashley, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Yep. Hi, everyone. Ashley Seyfried. I'm on the Commission for the Conservation of the Environment. I work for Regional Planning Board, and I'm the Director of Sustainability. Not representing them here today, but just have a deep interest in sustainability and live in the city of Binghamton.
Okay, and Hadassah?
Hello, I'm Hadassah. I'm on City Council, and in that capacity, I'm ex officio to the Environmental Commission. And one second. And I guess one of the relevant things for me with this particular committee is that I'm also kind of active with the Friends of the Greenway, which goes through the South Side. And I know that we're looking to have a walkthrough with the DOT, I believe, in the spring to understand what is invasive and what is native along that greenway. So I thought there might be some tie-ins with that.
Great.
Okay. Thank you.
And Julian Shepard is not here, so we'll let him introduce himself at the next meeting. My name is Tom Costello. I'm the acting chair, I guess, and I'm a retired director of building and construction for the city of Binghamton, and was very involved in flood mitigation efforts during numerous floods. So that alone prompted me to get involved with this project because I see potential there for that.
Richard.
Yeah, Richard, you can introduce yourself, please. Although you're not on the task force, would you tell us why you're here?
Okay, I'm Richard Giannaccio, and I'm also a member of the Commission for Conservation of the Environment for the City of Binghamton, and I'm here because I want to take an interest in all the committees. I may not be able to participate in every meeting of every committee, but I'm certainly support native plants, and I have a degree in biology, so I guess that includes plants. I did study plant physiology, and I did some research actually in photosynthesis back in my Hunter College days.
Okay. I still have a copy of the agenda, like.
You want me to print it out?
Yeah,
Sure.
just so I can write down on it or whatever. But did you all get to look at the document I sent out that says scoping? Um, it's just an email.
I got the email. It didn't have an attachment. It's just the title was Manage Native Garden Task Force. Is that the one you're referring to? Oh, okay. They're scoping below it. Okay, I see. It's copy and pasted it.
Yeah,
Okay.
for some of you, I sent out two, before I posted the files, there's, Hadassah, there's a pair of files, and Richard, there's a pair of files on Basecamp. One is a map that, the county GIS made for me, which is a map of city-owned vacant land. Not
Okay.
vacant, so, and the way I'm saying that is important because sometimes it gets confused with vacant property, which means many things to many people, but vacant land would be a parcel where there are no structures, or maybe just an ancillary, like a small shed or something. And and there's a table, that second file is a table, it's a CSV file, which is a standard spreadsheet file. But if you can't open that, let me know later and we'll address that. I don't even know if I can open it on my computer yet, but just for the record, Doug English, who's the GIS director at the county, has been very helpful in terms of helping us identify parcels. And if you go to the GIS tool, there's a way that you can do a search to reproduce the results that he had, with one caveat. If you identify the owner as the City of Binghamton on the GIS and search on that, for some reason, you also get the city school district properties as well. So I'm going to talk to Doug. I just found that out today, so I'm going to talk to Doug later to see if we can refine the search. If not, we can always articulate a search, a query, and then share that. They're really great about providing that information as a service. Does anyone have any questions about that? So if like you can't get the file open or it's too small to see, you can open up the GIS tool for the county and kind of refine it a little bit, or use it to do a more detailed search. Like I went on individual properties and looked at them. And one thing I found out was that vacant land that's owned by the city that was funded by FEMA demolition project that we did, they're identified as flood control property. So they have a different assessor's code attached to them, so vacant land is a 300 code, 300 series, and flood control property is an 800 series. Okay. So all of this is just what I started to do to try to help us understand what the extent of vacant land is that's owned by the city. There's also a whole lot of vacant land. You can use the GIS tool to just see how much of all the parcels in the city owned by anyone or everyone, how much of that is vacant land. And I'm sure at some point, if this project's successful, that could become important to know, especially when there's adjoining parcels, which frequently is the case. So does anyone have any questions about that?
Yes. Is vacant land interchangeable with undeveloped land, or is there a distinction?
It's contextual from my experience. So one of the issues that we're going to confront, that everyone confronts, is that different authorities or different agencies that have technical interaction with parcels in the city and everywhere in the state, basically, use different ways of identifying things. So when you say vacant land and look it up in the assessor's record, that might be different than what the vacant property officer thinks of as vacant land, or what the local GIS, they might have 3 or 4 or 5 different ways of cross-identifying vacant land. I know that doesn't directly answer your question, Richard, but I don't know of a code for undeveloped land. I could ask. But if you send me those questions, I can share them with Doug because he's a pretty good resource for answering questions like that.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have a reason why you were asking that question?
Because I've heard both terms and I wanted to know if there was a
Okay.
distinction between them.
Yeah, I think that's something that like it's going to be difficult in the beginning, but eventually we'll understand what all of us mean by different terms like vacant or flood control land. Like that might not be a term you've heard before, but there's quite a bit of flood control land in the city. And there's, questions about who's responsible for maintaining it and does it include structures or is it all like absent structures, things like that. Okay. We don't have, okay, I have the agenda now, so I'm going to go back to that for a second. We did the roll call. We don't have a meeting minutes because we never met before. We don't have any public comment unless Richard, you want to make a statement as a public comment?
Well, I was wanting to mention that the South Side Neighborhood Assembly should probably be contacted because they were looking for maybe people to help out with the garden in front of the auto zone, which is a very visible space, and it's a very small piece of land, but it could be a good showcase for the native garden project.
Okay, we'll note that.
They're down. They used to have a whole team of people, and they're down to one person now. So
yes, I'm familiar with the genesis of that parcel and the work that was done originally on that. So that's a good point. Anything else you wanted to say?
no, thank you.
Okay, so that closes public comment. We don't have previous business. So as I said, the new business is the organizational meeting. Does anyone want to comment on that topic specifically, like with questions or statements? Hearing, no, yes? No? Okay. So one thing I was thinking about myself, getting ready for this meeting was, what expectations do we have around how we're going to contribute individually and then collectively as a group towards some common goals or goals? And because of my own experience, the first thought I had, like I said, was this inventory concept. And but I thought of other things that might come up in discussion where we might be able to individually perform some research or reach out to different people and then bring it back to the next meeting, whatever that is, and share it or use Basecamp to that effect as well. Because I could see where this could go in a lot of different directions really quickly. And I wondered if any of you feel the same way. Like, you can see my thoughts. I, shared them with you in terms of some of my own concepts of goals, but does anyone have a response to that? Like, what would you say are your own goals for the committee as you imagine them, or would like to, see that happen? I know you mentioned joy, Jill, and you mentioned beautification, and you mentioned what I called ecologically strengthening, but it could be described a lot of ways, but I think that's the spirit of where you're going with that. And we didn't talk about stormwater management, but that's, I think, of something of importance as well. So one thought I had was start small. So Richard, you might even like got it down to a level I didn't even think of yet, but for reasons I can go into later, or you can talk about yourselves. I think a pilot kind of would be helpful. We just got a new city budget, so there's not really money, like available or resources necessarily available, but a small pilot project might be achievable to at least demonstrate some answers to some of the questions that I've raised. So please jump in if you have a counter thought or you want to add to what I'm saying, but
Thank you.
go ahead, Jill.
I have a question about, do we have the expertise we need to be addressing these goals?
I'm having difficulty hearing you. I don't know if you can speak any louder or you have a,
Oh, I'm sorry. I was saying, do we have the expertise that we need to be addressing stormwater management, flood resiliency goals through planting?
no, at least not to my knowledge, based on my own experience. There may be bits and pieces in different staff or in different departments, but one of the concerns that I've expressed in the past, and Hadassah, you've heard me, I think, say this before, the city is, to my knowledge, doesn't have a single entity who's like the endpoint for municipal property. So we have a vacant property officer, we have an economic development office, we have a zoning officer, and we have the planning department, and we have the assessor's office, and we have the parks department, and we have public works, and we have engineering, and of course we have the mayor's office, and I'm probably forgetting at least one or two other entities, not to mention the other entities like FEMA or the DEC that all have a finger in the pie, so to speak. So it's complex as could be from like a global perspective. There's a lot of people that get involved, and that was really evident during the flood. I don't know that we have any people with specific expertise in the kind of biological or ecological side of that. And when the city doesn't have professional or technical resources like that, they usually go to a consultant for that type of service, in my experience.
I could check in. One of my rewilding buddies is a recently retired environmental engineer, and this is what she did professionally.
Okay.
So I would be happy to check in with her and just try to get some general advice.
Okay, that's good, because again, I don't know if any of you other persons thought of this, but I like to say that you shouldn't reinvent the wheel if you can avoid it. And so one question I had for you, Jill, specifically, or you might forward to your friend, is, are there any examples of other municipalities of a similar nature to ours that have an active program that we could, like, you know, look at and possibly use as a model for what we're thinking about, since we don't have any model on the table yet? So that would be, you know, and that was like one of those tasks that I thought, when this meeting's over, if someone wants to volunteer to, like, just, you know, just to see if, you know, they can Google it and come up with, you know, a couple things, not make it too difficult, but just that idea.
I can also post that to the National Wild Ones and
All right.
Homegrown National Park
All right.
Facebook pages.
Yeah.
That might be a good way to get
Okay,
it.
so that's another good thing, that hopefully as we move forward, we can start keeping track of resources that are relevant to our own project here. You just made me think of the Soil and Conservation District resources here locally. I think they have a new director. I'm not sure. Ashley, do you know that?
I think she's off.
Oh, she's off. Okay. Well, Chip McAway used to be the director there, and he was like a great resource, but I think he retired. But that's another example of someone that would be interested in this. Also, the Cornell Cooperative Extension, I'm sure they have resources that could help us with that, especially given their interest in plants, right? It's like So I just don't personally know if, I mean, I could reach out to them if that's what we want to do, but I think as we go forward, we'll accrete references like that, resources. Do you know, have you ever heard of a federal guidelines coming out of any federal office? Because there's usually like pretty good things in the federal government in terms of guideline, you know, project. I mean, it's just something to think about.
The other thing that I'll do is I'll go through the list of webinars because I'm pretty certain that the Wild Ones National did a series of webinars related to this that I didn't attend, but if I find that, I'll send the information along.
Okay. That's helpful also, because Hadassah, you can speak to this if you want, would like, but I know that when people come up with ideas like this for the municipality, the first question that a council person is liable to ask is, how are you going to pay for it? And what's it going to take? Are there grants available? And take you right down that bunny hole, which is fine. It's a good thing to do, but it can be a bunny hole. So that's something else for all of us to be thinking about, is like what I wrote down about the resources. And right now, just to give you a little background real quickly, because I know time is a constraint here for some people. For the reasons that I mentioned before, it's really difficult to get a coherent answer to how is vacant land being handled right now. Some of it is essentially wild in the sense that it's maintained at a minimum level over an annual period, a budgetary annual period. Some examples of that would be like some of the flood control areas that aren't levees or specific structures. Some of it is periodically maintained by the Parks Department in terms of cutting stuff or pruning things, or addressing wildlife issues, or addressing pollution like garbage. I'm sure some of it is probably caught up in other aspects. I don't know how to say this. Vacant land is vacant land. Some of it's being used by private entities illegally for things like parking lots, for housing, and other types of storage. Sometimes people use it for storage. And because there's not a particular entity who like routinely inspects all those properties to see what's going on, that's you know, I've had experience where people were parking on city land, on municipal property for quite a long period of time, and were shocked to learn that it didn't belong to their landlord, that it was municipal property and being used illegally. Even though we posted signage in a lot of them, they still didn't get it. So does anyone want to interrupt me with a question? Or should I keep going the way I'm going here? Because you got to leave. Oh, go ahead, Hadassah.
No, this sounds good. Sorry, I've been only intermittently able to handle things. I'm home with a sick kid.
Okay.
But I really like the idea of putting some intentionality into thinking about the vacant lots. I think they're in every district. There's something that I certainly get complaints about. People saying, oh, I think that's a city lot and they don't even mow their own lot, things like that. Like, it's just, people feel pretty negative towards the way some of these look. I know that native species and that kind of view isn't, an environmental view isn't necessarily just focusing on the look of things, but conceivably it could also make neighborhoods look nicer.
That's definitely the case. Hadassah, one thing that I thought council might be able to support this project with or by is like reaching out to the assessor or the planning department. Because to my knowledge, at least in the past, no one has ever looked at all the vacant land owned by the city and then recategorized it around like what's developable, what's an ideal property for the adjoining, what do they call it, the where you sell a lot to a adjoining property owner for $1 or whatever. I forget the formal name for that program, but oh, you're muted.
Side lot
Side lot
program.
excuse me, yes. And what really needs to be integrated into our stormwater, or what's relevant to our, like, I don't know who you would ask the question of right now, perhaps in engineering. I know they have the resources to answer that question, but I don't think you could walk up to the city engineer and say, how many of the municipal lots are relevant to stormwater? You know, things like questions like that. But
And my perspective, like what I've been hearing relating to just generally of city property, it seems like the goal is to try and sell as much of it as possible to reduce liability. That would be kind of a theme of discussion around property sale.
okay, so that's a good point, because that's I'm going to add that to my legal constraints, because that's liability is definitely something I can appreciate the interest in that, but that only calls into sharper focus, like really having a full, more informed and data-driven appreciation for what property we're actually talking about in a proactive way rather than in a reactive way, where you have issues, whatever those issues may be, that introduce liability. And then, I was on the planning commission, I was on the zoning board of appeals before I worked for the city. And it's just kind of astonishing that how little sometimes is known about particular parcels that are owned by the city. Like, seriously, like there are parcels that people don't even know exist, probably, except on the GIS and the assessor's initial documentation. A lot of those parcels are in your district on the south side. They're wooded parcels. They're not occupied by anyone. They're ghost subdivisions. There's all kinds of things that you might be surprised to know are there. And they only become an issue when there's, something introduces liability or a fire, something that but okay. Good to know.
Yeah, it seems, I don't know, my impression of the property sale stuff, which it comes before council, obviously, is it seems like some point somebody reaches out to the mayor's office with some request or proposal, and generally the city is eager to get rid of the property, whether it be a side lot or some such, so that it's no longer, so it gets back on the tax rolls as well as reducing liability.
Right. So again, that brings
But
up
it doesn't seem like there's at least from where I sit, it doesn't seem like there's much of a vision behind it. It's just like an opportunity arises for the city to sell a property, and they are eager to get it done from the executive side, and then it comes to council.
So these types of things are really important to this discussion, and they're kind of the flip side of what Jill was and Richard were talking about on the other side, because not knowing whether, for example, a particular parcel, what I was thinking of was a political issue, is that redevelopment in the floodplain is in some circles is considered a bad idea. And if you have a municipal lot that's in the floodplain and someone wants to buy it, it's vacant land, and they want to develop it to bring it back on the tax rolls, the political question becomes, is that a good thing for the city or a bad thing for the city? And is the cost short-term, is the short-term gain of getting it back on the tax roll worth the long-term cost if it ends up inundated and destroyed and becomes a burden to the taxpayer through FEMA or through the federal government? I mean, you pay one way or the other. That's what we learned from our flood experience. It's like, it's a pay me now, pay me later thing, and not everybody sees it the same way. And I'm not saying I have the right answer, but it's a subject for discussion when we're looking at vacant land and, you know, how it can be used. A silly example would be like, as far as I know, 72 Court Street is still undeveloped, right? It's still in city control, right? So you would want to plant
I
wild.
would not say that I am good at keeping track
All right, well,
of.
let's just say theoretically, the city still controls that parcel at the corner of State and Court Street. It would be silly of us to go to them and say, we want to plant native species there. Like, I think, because there would be so much blowback. But if, you know, so that's what I'm talking about when, in terms of our inventory. And I want to get some consensus around, like, I will go, one of my tasks for myself is to go meet with Doug. If you'd like to go with me, he's a great person to talk to at the county, and just see how much he can partner within the scope of his duties and responsibilities. You know, and try to get a partnership growing with him in terms of that. And I think that could serve a lot of
I'd be interested in going with you.
What's that?
I'd be interested in going with you.
Okay, so I'll let you know about that. Did you get that?
We got everything.
All right. Is there any, Jill, have you ever seen the GIS? Have you been on it? Do you know how to get on it?
Jill, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm just gonna stay unmuted so I don't keep doing that. Sorry. I don't know how to work with GIS stuff.
Okay, so it's a if you just type Broome County GIS parcel mapper. It's
Okay.
I can put, maybe just for ease of this conversation, Jill, I can put in when I send out the minutes, I can put instructions for accessing the GIS. It's a really simple tool to use. So I'm
Great,
happy
thank
to
you.
just include that in my email to everybody.
Yeah, it's a
And-
public facing tool. So
Okay.
you don't need any particular skills, although the query, it's very limited what you can do in terms of queries, sort and filter type queries. But Doug is really great about, like, if we articulate queries, like, show us all the vacant land that's in the flood inundation area that's owned by the city that doesn't, like, serve any other purpose. And it's to the extent that he has the data, he can produce a map pretty quickly, and the maps are really useful.
And I'm sure that council members would be interested in seeing maps of their districts too,
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
city-owned property, because I feel like that's something I should know.
Yeah, no, it's
I'm
totally
guessing others would find it that way as well.
right. So there's the public
The neighborhood
face.
assemblies might be interested in that as well. The neighborhood assemblies might have some,
yeah.
just like Richard mentioned, the Southside Neighborhood Assembly and their green team
Right.
gardening area. There might be some thoughts or ideas that come out of that.
One thing I would love to see considered for the long term would be to look at the parcels and the ones that have the best soil and the best light. You know, could those get set aside for vines or for food forests, or, you know, that's where you have a lot of potential.
So again, that's like a really good point where immediately I'm like, well, that I know there are maps out there, GIS data maps that people like the Soil and Conservation District or Cornell Cooperative Extension could, like, overlay. That's where we need a partnership. around the data and around, the participants of the people that are doing that. So there's public facing information and then there's back end information. And Hadassah, like something that we could talk about later, but to think about is like, at one point we had a data sharing agreement with the county GIS. And I don't know if that agreement still stands at this time, or if it needs to be revived, but
How would I figure that out?
that's a good question. Like, I think that
Do I even know what
when we
agreements
meet
are
with
in effect?
Doug, when we meet with Doug, we can talk to Doug about it on his end. But
Yeah.
I'm just saying that, not to sound like a broken record, but I bring it into every story or every conversation. That was a need identified around data in the city. It's like, who should we have formal agreements with so we can do seamless, so you don't have to do a kind of formal request for data. You can just interdepartmentally share data. Okay. There was at a point where we were going to be included on the county servers. Like, I don't know where that paperwork is because all my paperwork is gone upstairs, but I mean, that's where it was at, so that I could get into, because we used real property data and other things that wasn't publicly facing, and we could just get into it. You know what I'm talking about? So that the law department would have those agreements, and hopefully if you approach it, then Sam doesn't have to foil it, but. Right. Okay, I understand. Are there any other comments you want to add to the under new business or?
I can format these minutes so that there are follow-up steps, both collectively and individually,
Great.
just for all of you.
Great.
And I would say, Hadassah, just internally, you might want to loop Wayne into the discussion around data sharing. I know he has a relationship with Doug already, so that might be someone you want to include in that discussion.
Yeah, I don't want to open a can of worms with that, but I'm just saying that, like, because some of us are not municipal staff and we have this semi-municipal representative role, what's the protocol if I like reach out and ask for information that, or want to share it with department heads, or not department heads, but municipal staff? Like, do I have to go through a particular person or whatever, that's going to come up sooner or later, it's like, so.
Or continuously.
Yeah. So is Richard, maybe you and I can talk later by email, just so I can get a clearer picture of what you and Hadassah are talking about with the Southside Neighborhood Assembly issues right now. And Jill, is that relevant to Native Gardens, or are you familiar with that little parcel? It's very small.
I'm not familiar with it, but I mean, you can do something even in a really small place. So, does anyone know the address of it? I could go take a look.
It's at the
It's
corner
in front of the AutoZone. The AutoZone in Southside, it's like
Corner of Pennsylvania Avenue and Vestal Avenue.
Yeah. It's the southwest corner.
Yes.
Also, one other person I thought I would reach out to just bring her into the loop is Amelia at Vines, the director at Vines.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's just to give her a heads up that we're doing this project, to make sure she's aware of it, if she can be of assistance, or if it has any relevance to her own mission or projects that she might have going on. Does that make sense to you guys? Yeah.
Yes.
So, also, if there, I don't have the software on my computer yet that I might need for certain things, but if you have any limitations that way, like you can't print stuff or something, please let me know. or if you have a preferred method of communication, that would be helpful. Right now, we can use our personal emails, correspondence.
Yeah, Jill, I don't know if you have access to Basecamp.
I was going to ask you about that. I have
Okay.
used Basecamp on other projects, but
Okay,
I just need,
so I'll
Fine.
work with IT to set up your Basecamp access.
thank you.
And so
Okay.
I'll just say that the clerk's office is happy to provide folks with technology assistance. We'll set up the room for meetings. You should choose a secretary though, because we won't always be available to take notes for you. So that might also be a follow-up action item
All right,
for you
let's
in
make it-
terms of organization.
Yeah, that'll be a good one for the next meeting. Was this a good or bad meeting time?
Fine.
Okay. All right,
Fine for me, but I'm not necessary for scheduling. But I'll try and be when I can.
yeah, and
You should check with Ashley because I know she has very specific time
yeah,
constraints.
okay. So I will send out a notice about tentative dates and then move forward from there like once a month. Is once a month a good time period?
Seems so.
Like the way I'm looking at this is that there's a lot of prep work that we can do amongst ourselves, but I think in the physical world, we're a year behind the budget basically. So just knowing how the city functions sometimes, that's an important thing to keep in mind. Hadassah, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we're not. Yeah. That said, we kind of tried to make it pretty clear during budget season that we expect that depending on how the winter goes,
Right.
that after the winter that there may be more funds available, right? So obviously salt and plowing and DPW overtime and a lot of that stuff,
Right.
we'll know by the spring
Right.
how much is left from kind of that emergency money. So we, didn't allocate all the kind of the contingency money in advance of the winter. And the other one is kind of the electricity costs that where it seemed kind of variable and all over the
Right.
place.
Right.
So we'll be doing more check-in on that. So I would say both, yes, we're not in the kind of budget planning portion of the year.
Right.
That said, depending on whether or not it's a mild winter, there may be funds available for projects in the springtime. So it's not a bad time to think about projects, even though there is no money, at least before the spring.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that. And I just think it's realistic to kind of think about like any significant movement on the ground might take a while before it could happen. Let's leave it that way. Like whether that's a year, whether it's 3 months, or whether it's not. But
well, in terms of planting too, I mean, there's not much.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah.
Planting can be done before the spring anyway. But this is certainly a planning time. And things like Richard's idea with the auto zone, if there's ability to assist with that as a pilot, that may cost basically nothing.
Yeah. And one last thing I want to bring up before we terminate this is remembering our private or potential private partners, like or non-municipal, let's put it that way, whether they're not-for-profit organizations or private entities. There might be someone who has a parcel that they would sometimes when you're free of the constraints of municipal law, you can, because then you can answer questions. That's why I'm thinking about it. It's like really great when you can go to the mayor, to the city council and say, here are your, like, we've done the answers before we raised the questions, like basically. That's helpful sometimes. So it's like, what's this going to cost? Going to cost X dollars per acre. What's it going to take? It's going to take 30 people a year. Those kinds of questions that you can kind of say with confidence. That's why I think other municipalities might be a really helpful resource where they can help you get your hands around that. Right? Okay, any other business? No? Well, I appreciate your time and I will be in touch. If you think of something, just drop me an email.
Thank you, Tom.
Want to make a motion to adjourn? I forgot the motion part of all this, but Jill, can you make a motion?
Sure. Motion to adjourn?
All right, I'll second it and we'll adjourn.